Welcome everyone. My name is Dovi Frances, the founding partner of Group 11, and I'm excited to welcome you to the fourth part of our six-part webinar series, Digitizing the Office of the CFO. In our last episode, we hosted Thomas Tusher, the CFO of TripActions, Einat Gez, the CEO and co-founder of Papaya Global, and most recently, Sarah Spoya, the CFO of Tipalti. For those of you turning in for the first time today, we decided to launch this webinar to create a forum where finance leaders and professionals can learn about the tools and strategies that best enable businesses to thrive in the face of quite a challenging macro environment. As the world becomes far more unpredictable, finance leaders are faced with a spectrum of challenges stemming from this chaos. We believe that many of our portfolio companies featured in this webinar today offer important tools that can improve the odds of success for businesses of all sizes. On that note, I'm happy to welcome here today Veetahl Eilat-Raichel, the CEO and co-founder of Sorbet. Prior to Sorbet, Veetahl was an executive at L'Oreal, Lockheed Martin, and Instacart. Hi, Veetahl.
Hey,
it's great to see you here.
Good to see you.
Let's jump right into it. So let's talk a little bit about you. Typically I like to start with a more personal kind of like note that people kind of like can learn a little bit more about you and your background and what you stand for. So, you have over 20 years of significant experience working with massive corporations like L'Oreal, Lockheed Martin, Instacart. These are very different businesses. What is kind of like the common thread that has persisted in your career that brought you and shaped your outlook and vision to your role as the CEO and co-founder of Sorbet today?
Well, I think the one thing that is maybe kind of unique is that I've never actually thought about entrepreneurship. It wasn't something that I was planning on doing. I didn't have this romantic kind of concept of starting my own business. I was very much a corporate person my entire career. But I think looking back, I've always been kind of an entrepreneur in residence and kind of this person who consistently was very much fascinating with disruption and finding new opportunities. I was always on like the biz dev and marketing side. And really kind of my jam was trying to identify trends and kind of, ways to crack new avenues for revenue. And so I guess in hindsight, I was always kind of entrepreneurial, but it took a while before I had that burn in me to go out there and do something different. And I think the one thing that's starkly different here, unlike working in a corporate, is that you have to work fast, not be risk averse, and be very, very scrappy.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about Sorbet. Maybe tell us first and foremost, what is Sorbet about and what is the problem that Sorbet is trying to solve for?
Yeah, so we basically stumbled upon this huge market opportunity around unused paid time off. And so I think very much often flies under the radar for a lot of CFOs and business leaders. There's this over $300 billion worth problem that keeps rolling over on employers' balance sheets in the US alone. And when we stumbled upon this problem, we saw a huge opportunity to unlock tremendous value, both to employers and to employees. And so what we do is effectively allow employees to liquidate a portion of their unused PTO so they can use it as financial aid now instead of having to wait until they ultimately leave the company, while significantly helping employers with cash flow, working capital, and alleviating the liability from the balance sheet.
Yeah. Fascinating. I recently read a statistic, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 50%, it might have been 55%. It states that 55% of all Americans, so the entire workforce represents that as well, right? Live paycheck to paycheck and cannot bear to pay an unforeseen expense that is in excess of $500.
Yeah, that's correct. And another fascinating data point that I recently read is that it's not we're programmed to think of lower wage earners as people who encounter this problem, but there was a recent statistic around people earning $250,000 annually, and a third of them live paycheck to paycheck. So, in fact, people struggle to live according to their cost of living, regardless of their wage and salary.
Yeah, definitely. With the rising inflation, rising prices, I'm sure that this issue is going to persist. I think about all the people that are either even like trying to buy a home or stuck with mortgages that are on variable rates. And yeah, it's gonna get worse before it gets better. That's for sure.
Oh, 100%. Wage inflation, while at its highest since the early 2000s, it has not, stepped up to actual inflation. There's actually about a over 2% gap between increase in salaries on average and increase in cost of living.
Yeah. In one of Peter Thiel's books, I read this quote when he talks about, tell me about one fundamental truth that nobody agrees with you on. Is pay time off being an underutilized asset one such truth? Meaning that, like, I haven't seen any technological solution around that matter. How come nobody ever tried to solve for that?
So I don't necessarily know for a fact the answer to that question. We have a few hypotheses around it, but I think that, the most stunning thing is that I often talk to CFOs, some of them extremely sophisticated, CFOs of publicly traded companies. And it's just one of those things that, it's in the back of their minds, but it's not necessarily something that they usually think about. And my thought is around the fact that it's usually an HR KPI or an HR managed metric that is not top of mind for CFOs, and it kind of sneaks up on them in the worst possible moment. And I'm guessing we'll talk about, these inopportune moments like, a restructuring or a layoff or an IPO or an M&A, where all of a sudden you have to be super conscious of, those little line items to sneak up on your balance sheet.
You know what? Let's do it. Let's double click on the problem from, like, almost like a marketplace, right? Let's talk about it from the employer's perspective, and the people who head HR, the CFOs, and let's talk about it from the employee's perspective. And can you describe the problem for both of them?
Oh, absolutely. So in order to, I'll use a mathematical example if that's okay.
Sure.
It would be the easiest way to explain it. So let's just say an employee is eligible for 12 days off a year. That means that on average, each month, they're supposed to work for 19 days and then they get paid not to work one day, right? Because there's a 20-day month, basically, work day month. And so what happens is that if you don't actually take that day that you were supposed to take off, that means that your salary pays you for 19 days, but you in effect work 20. So for that extra day that you worked, you don't get paid with your salary to your bank account. You earn an illiquid asset called accrued time. It's yours. You earned it because you already worked for it. It has a very clear financial value to it, right? It's very easy to calculate how much one day's work is worth out of your paycheck. 100%. But you can't pay at the supermarket with it, right? You can't pay at the gas station with it. It's an illiquid asset you hold on to. If you go onto your HR system, you will see it there. But you can sit on it until some future point when you leave the company. That's the only time where if you hadn't used it by then, you will get cashed out by most employers, depending on the policy. But the vast majority of employers in the US will let you roll it over and accrue until you get terminated or leave on your own accord. But then you'll get it in cash. So in effect, it becomes this bonus to next employee. Well, as long as they're there, they can't do anything about it. Now, whenever I describe the problem, I usually ask, so who gains from it? And people assume there's some nefarious employer on the other side trying to, take advantage of that innocent employee, where in fact, it's actually worse from the employer's perspective because, obviously if an employee worked and you haven't paid them yet, you owe them this money, right? It's a debt. But it's not part of some sophisticated financial planning by the CFO, right? This is not some sophisticated, financial engineering. It's inflicted upon you as a CFO or as a manager of P&L whenever an employee decides not to take their time. So all of a sudden you have this debt, which you didn't ask for, but it gets worse because you never know when you're going to have to pay it back, right? Unlike any loan or liability that you will take from a bank or from another financial establishment, whenever an employee decides to leave or whenever the direct manager decides to fire them, that's when you're going to have to pay it off. So it's entirely unpredictable in timing, but worse, you never actually know how much it's going to cost you. Because what a lot of people often miss is that it doesn't matter how much the employee earned when they originally accrued this time. They have to pay it according to their salary when they leave. So there's that compounded interest rate of wage inflation, which you have to bake in to this entire liability. And it ends up ballooning and ballooning and ballooning compoundedly each year until the employee ultimately leaves. So it's probably the worst load you have on your balance sheet.
Fascinating. So now let's talk about two things. I always like when we have board meetings to talk about people, pipeline, product, right? And sometimes processes as well. But let's talk a little bit about the product and how it solves the problem from the employee's perspective, from the employer's perspective. And then let's talk about go-to-market and sales a little bit, and how easy or difficult is it to take this very clear concept that you've outlined and discuss it with employers and employees alike. Yeah.
Yeah. So we saw this huge market opportunity. Obviously, there's this mountain of cash, 300 billion, as I mentioned, and we were obsessed about saying, okay, if we unlock even a portion of it, we can release this value. And one unique thing about this market failure, which, coming from predominantly finance my entire career, I thought was really, really interesting, is that it's a very rare case where you need a market failure where no one wins. And usually when there's a market failure, you scratch the surface a little bit, you'll find someone with a vested interest that this market failure prevails. In this particular case, everyone gets, the short end of the stick. So it's currently a lose-lose situation. And we were obsessed with the fact that there's probably a way to turn this lose-lose into a win-win. And this is how we do it. We basically connect or integrate with the HR system and we intake the data. So we're able to analyze PTO consumption and usage, the company's policy, things around seasonality in the company, and of course, a lot of info that we currently have around demographics, and actually predict how this liability is going to end up acting. So it's a form of an actuary model, if you will, on this underlying asset called PTO or unused PTO, which no one has ever actually dealt with. What we do then is we're able to provide this actionable data both to the employer so they can predict what their liability is going to be like, but also to the employee and tell you, hey, Dovi, heads up, you actually have $3,784 worth of unused PTO, which we predict you will never be able to use. At that point, we tell you that you have the ability, if you so choose, and it's entirely up to you, to get it now instead of having to wait 2, 3, 8, 10, 15 years into the future. The way that we do that is that we cash it out for you. So nothing happens from a cash flow perspective to the employer. We provide you with this cash. We load it onto our prepaid card. It's a Visa prepaid card, so you can basically now use it anywhere. Starbucks, Amazon, gas station, grocery store, wherever you want. And then at that point, what happens is that the employee got paid, but the employer didn't actually have to pay them. The employer now has Sorbet as a financing tool to now, for the first time ever, take this entirely unpredictable liability and actually control it and predict it for the very first time. So we now allow the employer to decide when they pay us back. We usually amortize it over 6 to 12 months, but depending on the company, we can provide with even more beneficially conducive financial solutions. And by that, the employer now knows how to manage their cash flow, can probably free up a lot of working capital that they had set aside in case something like this happens. And our financing rate will always be lower than wage inflation by definition. So it's actually cost saving for the company.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And how does it look like? How does the product look like from, when the employees checking the platform, when the employer is checking the platform? What do they see? I know it's sometimes hard to visualize it, but to the extent you can.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty simple. When an employee signs up with their work email, what they see is their outstanding balance and our prediction of their unusable portion of their time. And then they can, in 3 simple steps, they activate their card, load the card, and can start paying with it. They could either, upload it onto their Google Pay or Apple Pay and use it at any point of sale, or use it online wherever you want. We also provide physical cards, but so they can start using it. We then start offering a lot of, value-added services like discounts on, travel and wellness and financial instruments. But for the most part, it's a super easy and frictionless experience. And of course, with each month that goes by, assuming they haven't used their PTO, they will get alerted on additional balance that they have its eligibility and will be able to use it again. So that's from the employee's perspective. From the employer perspective, we provide a real-time portal dashboard that both from an admin perspective allows an employer to onboard employees to the program and track, of course, the information and see how much money they've spent or saved actually, and the engagement and value that they've provided to their employees through our platform.
Okay, let's talk about go-to-market. It's a complicated question because there are also some significant macro trends that are taking place in the market right now, definitely in the technology landscape. Here's an interesting statistic. There are about 1,200 unicorns that are registered out there, okay? So companies with, privately held companies with a value of above $1 billion, and their cumulative value is around $3.8 trillion, right? And I was calling it a bubble back in 2019 when there were 400 unicorns with $1 trillion in cumulative value, because I thought there are no chance there are 400 categories to disrupt, and lo and behold, we now have 1,200. So definitely in the startup land, we're going to witness, at least that's my belief, okay? Significant layoffs that are going to continue ensuing, which of course, with respect to pay time off, are going to inflict significant pain on those companies. Which, because they have to lay off employees and extend their runway to meet their valuations again, right? Increase revenue and meet their valuation. How do you position Sorbet to those type of companies, so technology companies, privately held unicorns, etc.?
So first of all, I think the problem that you've described is already felt. We're seeing the layoffs, massive layoffs. I think that trend has already started. And I think the interesting thing to point out is that it's no longer strictly in tech. We're seeing it in banking as well. We've seen Goldman lay off about 8,000 employees. We're seeing it in media companies, Washington Post and companies like that. So it's already trickling down to traditional industries and even big tech. I mean, not just like, unicorns or, whatever they are. So it's definitely a wider problem. And I share your belief that we were only getting started. Tech companies are an interesting breed because for a certain point in their lives, they're flush with cash, right? They raise capital from VCs. They're not exactly super sensitive to their cash flow. That's not their top priority. There's also this very, very cynical trend, which we can talk about around transitioning to what's called unlimited PTO or flexible PTO, which is a little bit more prevalent with earlier stage tech companies. And so from our perspective, never been our focus necessarily, but we're definitely, the inflection point that becomes interesting is when these companies start to eye IPOs or significant M&As. And then that's the point where CFOs all of a sudden become a lot more conscious of traditional financial KPIs and the health of their balance sheet. And that's the point where Sorbet becomes very
interesting. And in your conversations with CFOs, CHROs of the various companies that you target as customers, what is on top of their mind right now? Because like I spoke with a few of them, including existing portfolio companies, and the word that they use often is consolidation. They're like, we have too many software service providers. We're consolidating only to the things that are pertinent to the success of our enterprise. What do you hear from them, and where does pay time off kind of like connects with that notion?
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, everything is going to be more difficult now, and people, are a lot more hesitant to try out new things. But we're very lucky in that our solution is a KPI needle mover, it's a bottom line needle mover. And in a time like this, people actively seek solutions that improve cash flow or allow them to save money. And so we're pretty well positioned in that respect. I also think that with everything said around layoffs, if you do talk to CFOs and CHROs, they are still going to talk a lot about talent retention. So perhaps not acquisition as much as before, but certainly the war for talent and retaining top talent is still top of mind. So actively seeking good benefits. And to your point in the beginning of the conversation, everyone needs right now additional financial aid. Everything is more expensive.
Yeah.
So I think we're kind of right at the nexus of that.
Yeah, fascinating. I think two things. First, this is a free financial aid, basically, to the employee. It's money, but it's money that's already owed to them. So releasing that makes perfect sense in today's world, and definitely as our economy become more constrained, I think it makes perfect sense. The second thing is the employee and employee benefits. I think, I'm older than you, probably way older. But when I got my first job out of UC Anderson at Deutsche Bank, I got, a nice blue binder, and they said, okay, this is your signing bonus, this is your salary, and, this is your 401k. and health insurance, and that's the extent of it. I think today, if you look at 2 years from now, circa 2025, 75% of the workforce are people who were born after 1980. And those people, I think, look at their role in society a little bit different than ours, and they expect more from their engagement with their employer, pay time off definitely being one such component.
100%. Research that we've conducted and external research consistently show that PTO is a top 3 benefit that people look for when switching for a job. Ironically, though, they want it, they seek it actively, but then they don't end up using it for reasons that I can go on and on about. But it's kind of this discrepancy between something that's very much kind of aspirational and something that's, considered very desired, but underutilized. And so to your previous point, the beauty with our solution is that you can provide additional financial benefit or additional compensation without increasing salaries. Another thing that I'm consistently hearing from employers is that they've raised salaries so significantly in the last couple of years that they just simply can't raise salaries any further while recognizing that people need the extra cash. So it's a unique opportunity.
100%. So earlier you alluded to unlimited pay time off.
Yep.
I just be careful here with my employees because we also utilize pay time off here, although we're a way smaller firm. But let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of pay time off and unlimited pay time off, and how prevalent is it really?
So according to our very recent research, pay time off or unlimited or flexible pay time off, same, is currently in about 8% of the market across US. But if you look at tech, it's a little bit, there's an overrepresentation in early stage tech of that particular model. It's a really, I'm sorry, it's a really, really bad benefit. It's great marketing, right? Because you can come to your employees and say, oh, you can take as much time as you want. But of course, the only reason that employers provide this as a benefit is because it removes that liability from the balance sheet. And we've never had a better, compelling example to that than what recently happened at both Goldman and Microsoft, where they literally announced transitioning to limited PTO and within months laid off, thousands of employees. And it's not feasible to even imagine a situation where that wasn't the exact discussion that was being held. It was completely driven by finances. And just to explain that, when you don't actually provide a set allocated amount of time, then there's nothing to put on the balance sheet as a commitment or a liability. But what happens there is that the employer essentially alleviates the responsibility, right? It's no longer up to them to monitor, to track, to nudge, to make sure, encourage, legitimize people to take time off. It's entirely off their plate. They're basically telling their employees, oh, you can take as much time as you want, but it's entirely up to you. And of course, what happens is that people end up taking less time. Our research shows that people on average take almost 3 days less, which of course means they work almost 3 days more, which means they effectively get paid less than their counterparts in other companies.
Yeah, we'll definitely, Das, our CFO, COO, is already nudging me that we might need to look into it, but thanks, Veetahl. But now, seriously, I think the other interesting component here is that while we have layoffs, when you look at the labor market in the Americas, it's pretty tight. Right? I mean, we have, for every person that's being terminated, there's 1.7 jobs that are kind of like being open. And I wonder how those things will conjure, right? How they will interact with one another.
Well, this recession is certainly very odd. It's not even, officially considered a recession. But I agree that there are a lot of, things that don't really add up. And the one thing that works against the trend is very, very low unemployment. And herein lays kind of the tension, because every single employer, every single business in the US is now on the drawing board trying to be more efficient, trying to be more 100%. Conservative, trying to save costs. And at the same time, you don't really have the privilege to downsize significantly. So this liability continues to balloon and balloon and balloon and balloon. But in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, I may actually have to lay a few people off. But as long as I don't, and as long as I don't deal with it in some effective way, this only exasperates the problem. And so, I think at some point the two will collide.
Absolutely. Quick question. I know that you guys recently released your 2022 pay time off report. First thing first, for our audience, which is comprised of CFOs, COOs, CHROs, etc., who wants to read this report, where can they find it?
Online in our website. I obviously find it super, super fascinating. There's so much, to dive into, and particularly, I think one of the things that are, is really cool about, talking to our buyers is that they're not only CFOs or COOs or CHROs, they're also employees who haven't taken time off in forever. And so it meets you both as an employee and as the employer. And there's a really, there's an infinite amount of data there that could be, I think very fascinating to go through.
Give us, like, I don't know, 3-4 main takeaways from the report for those of us who are lazy enough not to read the whole report.
So I will bore you with like the obvious things around, different statistics around, different industries and sizes and geographies and things like that. But, a fascinating social trend is that working from home has significantly exacerbated the problem. And ever since people transitioned to work from home, they've actually started to take a lot less time off. So that is really, really interesting to kind of, think through. And we have a bunch of hypotheses as to why that is. There's a bunch of stuff around men versus women and their tendencies to take time off, which wouldn't surprise people to learn that there's the usual kind of inequality and around, the amount of time that women get versus men and their usage of this time off. And then, I think the one thing that I found fascinating through our journey is understanding the differences in usage between lower wage earners and higher wage earners, and the unequitable portion that lower wage earners actually get as, benefits in general, wellness benefits in particular, and time off is just an example of that.
Got it. We're kind of like getting closer and closer to the end of our conversation. So what we'll do, I'll have one more question for you, and then we'll open it up for the audience and maybe ask a couple of questions from the Q&A here. I see a couple of them already coming up. Okay, let's start with my question. Let's travel in time. Sorbet 2030. Okay, what is kind of like, where do you see the company 7 years from now, and what is your ultimate vision for the company?
Well, obviously there's this mountain of $300 billion to conquer, and I think that, and that's the U.S. alone. One of the things that we're constantly getting is inbound demand from other markets, and it's certainly something that we would want to explore, and we've already started to actively explore a lot of other markets. The U.S. market is actually unique in that it's probably the only Western country in the world where there isn't a federally mandated law that requires employers to provide paid time off at all. Thankfully, it's kind of a boilerplate benefit that most employers do provide. But in other markets, it's actually regulated that people are supposed to get a set amount of time, and obviously that accrues and carries over to the potential there is infinite. Another thing that I'm really interested in is cracking potential other go-to-markets, like going bottom-up, which we've recently started experimenting with. So obviously there's a clear demand from the employee side, and we've come up with a way to position this solution as a direct-to-consumer, direct-to-employee rather solution, which is something that we're going to start doing increasingly in the next few years.
Got it. All right, let's switch to Q&A. There are a couple of questions here. There are 4 of them, but let me take one of them and paraphrase it a little bit. The question is essentially asking, what's your revenue model as a company, and what do you charge of the employees, and what do you charge of the employers?
So because of our, we actually, what we do is we earn a margin on the volume, right? So we're not a SaaS company. We don't charge a per employee per month fee. Our business model is based on the fact that employees pay us a cash out fee that ranges between 5 to 10% of their cash out amount, obviously for advancing what would otherwise only be available to them in some point in the future. And the employer pays us the financing fee, but again, for them, it's cost saving because it's lower than wage inflation. So for us, it's net gain. For them, it's cost saving. But between the financing that we provide the employer the cash out fee that we provide the employee, and two additional work stream or monetization streams that we actually have. One being the interchange fee on the prepaid card that we use to disperse the funds. And then additionally, we also have some affiliation fees coming in from partnerships that we do with brands like, Airbnb and Booking and other very, very soon there's a few financial establishments that will allow us to also disperse their financial solutions like long-term savings, 401ks, student loan repayments, and things like that. So that provides us a pretty healthy margin on our capital.
Okay, great. Another question here, talking about the breakdown of the type of customers that you have, and this person was a CFO. He's asking, what do you see more, digital or non-digital companies in the pipeline?
For sure, for us, one of the things that we learned very early on is that this solution appeals more to traditional industries. And in particular, companies who have frontline workers and lower wage earners, I think it makes a ton of sense. So we're seeing companies in retail, construction, manufacturing, hospitality. These are the types of companies that more immediately respond to our solution.
Middle market or enterprises?
Because we're a margins play, we want to, go up market as much as we possibly can, but we currently have a gamut.
Okay. What's the minimum size customer you'll take?
We will probably start serving customers as low as 500, but our goal would be at least 1,500 and above.
Got it. Well, Veetahl, we ran out of time. It was such a pleasure to spend time together today, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and tell us more about Sorbet and the promise that you bring to the paid time off market. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Maybe we'll do like a little bit of a closing statement here for those of our audience members that aim to join our future webinars. So if you're interested in connecting first and foremost with Veetahl and the team, please reach out to Lian, our head of value creation, at lian@group11.vc, and you will receive a special offer for having participated in our discussion today. Our next virtual fireside chat will be with the CEO and co-founder of Healthy, Guy Benjamin, and we're looking forward to having all of you join us Wednesday, March 1st. See you soon. Thank you.